Hey friends, come along with me while I warp the hoop for our blue tone weaving project. To start off, I'm going to wind the thread onto a small piece of cardboard. Untangling threads is a part of life when you're crafting. The best approach is to pull the knot apart as opposed to yanking on the ends, because that will usually make your knot tighter. Now that I've got all the thread wound onto my shuttle, I'm going to remove the outer ring of the hoop by loosening the screw and then popping the outer ring off. Leaving a 4-inch tail, and this is important because I'm going to use this towards the end of my warping process. I am going to tie a knot around the inner ring. Moving forward, you're going to want to keep your wraps around the hoop tight, but not so tight that they warp the shape of your hoop. For the next step in the process, I'm going to bring my shuttle behind my hoop and then drop the shuttle through the center of my ring and then bring it directly across about 3/4 of an inch from where I first knotted onto the ring. I'm then going to bring my hand down to pinch the wrap so it doesn't loosen up, drop my shuttle through the center of the ring, coming around back behind it, and then doing my wrap around and then dropping it through the center. And I'm going to repeat that process all the way around the ring, and you should pause once you have a total of 32 spokes on your wheel. You can work clockwise or counterclockwise. I am working clockwise around the ring, but you just want to make sure you're going in the same direction every single time. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is you work each wrap directly across the ring from the previous wrap. If the warp isn't crossing exactly in the center of your ring, don't worry about that. We're going to be adjusting as we go along. The key piece to this is you'll notice that the wraps are forming a bit of a figure 8 around the ring. I'm dropping my shuttle through the center of the ring each time I do a wrap, coming back around behind it, and then bringing my shuttle over the top of the ring and then down through the center. And I'm just going to repeat that until I have 32 wraps. And you'll notice I'm not going to speed any of this up. I'm going to edit this video so it's almost real time. That way you can see that at different points I'm adjusting my spokes around the wheel, checking my tension, and just making sure I have my spoke count correct. And here you can see that the center is not exactly in the middle of the ring, but I'm not worried about it at this point because once we're done with all of our wraps, we're going to adjust the spokes so that the center is actually in the middle of the ring. The instructions call for 33 spokes total, and that's what I'm showing you guys how to do here. But it's totally okay to do less or more spokes based on what type of look you're going for. The key thing is you want to end up with an odd number of spokes once you're done with your warp. And with 33 spokes total, you're shooting for about 3/4 of an inch between each of your spokes. So you can see here I'm adjusting as I go along. making sure that the distance is approximately 3/4 of an inch. And I'm also doing this to make room for the new wraps as I go clockwise around my circle. And I'm pretty good at eyeballing distances at this point, but here you can see me using my ruler just to make sure what 3/4 of an inch distance between spokes looks like. And so I'm making a few more adjustments as I get ready to finish up the spokes on this wheel. And once you get to this spot, I think I've got about 20 plus spokes on the wheel at this point. You're going to notice that I'm also stopping to adjust my spokes a lot more than I was doing in the initial phases. And that's because in order for me to continue doing my wraps clockwise around the circle, I need to make room for those new wraps. So I'm just adjusting the distances to make sure that each spoke is about 3/4 of an inch apart and that they're evenly spaced around the wheel. In this next little segment, you can see that I have gotten a little bit off track on my wraps, and I need to reverse some of the wraps that I've done in order to keep the correct configuration around the circle. So I'm just reversing my motions and bringing my shuttle back through the hoop a couple times to unwind some of the wraps that I've done because I did them in the wrong spot. And I included this just to show you guys that, even for someone like me who's done this kit multiple times, like when you're doing the wrap, you may do the wrap in the wrong spot and have to undo your work, and that's totally fine. It's just part of the process. So I'm just unwinding to the spot where I started to make a mistake, and I'm restarting, and that looks a lot better than what it looked like before. So hang with me for just a little bit longer. I am continuing to wrap until I get to my 30-second wrap, at which point I'm going to pause because I'm going to wrap my thread around the center of my spokes to tighten everything up. Also, another word of encouragement: when you're working on a big loom like we do for some of our art installations at the shop, it's always the most tedious part of the weaving to actually be warping the loom and running the threads and setting everything up. The part where we actually get to weave with our yarn is the most fun part, but we just got to get through the warping to get to the fun part. All right, y'all, we are almost there. I just finished up my 30-second wrap, and now I'm going to just tighten up some of the slack in my thread by rewinding it back around the shuttle. And this part's pretty cool. Watch what I do next. I'm going to take my shuttle and I'm doing one more wrap around the outside of the ring, but then instead of going to the other edge of the ring, I'm actually dropping it inside to wrap the cord around the center of my spokes. And you can see that as I'm wrapping it around and tightening it up, that center intersection gets a lot tighter. And I'm just doing this several times, working my way around the ring so that it tightens up evenly. And here I'm going to drop my shuttle through the center of my ring one last time to form the 33rd spoke. And I am going to tie a knot to connect it to my 4-inch tail that I created at the beginning of the process. You want to make sure that while tying this knot that you maintain the tension on that last warp thread. So I'm using my thumb and my middle finger to help keep it from slipping while I tighten down that last knot. It's a little bit tricky. So now that I've finished up my warp, I'm going to cut my tail and then shift my rings around the spoke to make sure everything's lined up and even. Remember, we are shooting for 3/4 of an inch between each leg of the spokes. And we also need to shift things around to make sure that the center of the warp is located in the center of the hoop. And after adjusting all of my spokes, you can now see that the intersection is squarely in the middle of my hoop. So I'm going to replace the outer ring, do a few more last adjustments, and then tighten down the screw to make sure everything is locked into place. And that's it. You have made it through the most challenging piece of this kit. The fun part is next, where you get to play with the different color yarns to create your own original weaving.